So the government said that he was born subject to the jurisdiction thereof, and he was a citizen. But the government was wrong all along. Do they have some lawful permission to be here, to subject themselves to our jurisdiction and agree to abide by it and let us know you're even here in the building? No, they don't. Yeah, and Van Hollen went down there.
In the United States, the rate of illegal border crossings dropped 99% when President Trump was sworn back into office.
Birthright citizenship denied for this person called Roberto Moncada. And there's some interesting parallels between this person's case, which is a bit unique because he was the son of a diplomat, and other illegal aliens who are in our country. The question, of course, for both of them is, what does subject to the jurisdiction thereof mean? It's in the 14th Amendment. And they say, many people, that if you're just physically here, you're kind of inside the geographic jurisdiction, and so that's enough. Whereas the actual interpretation is you have to engage with the laws and agree to be under those laws and to be held accountable to those laws. And if you don't do that because you're the diplomat's son and you have immunity and you're not subject to our laws, then you're not subject to our jurisdiction. Or, in my opinion, if you're an illegal alien and you come into this country illegally and you are not subject to the jurisdiction because you're not checking in at a port of entry, you're not validating yourself with ICE or immigration, you're here operating in the shadows in open violation, flagrant violation of the law, knowing you're here illegally, you are not subject to the jurisdiction, and neither is your child. So your child comes out, you have been in the country illegally, unlawfully, in open repudiation of the jurisdiction. Birthright citizenship shouldn't apply to you either. So we'll see how this may parallel over, but here's the case. Roberto Moncada versus Marco Rubio, saying, I am a citizen, you know. Court says, no, you're not. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruling down on this one, and we've got a nice decision. It says, the panel here affirmed of the lower level district court and denied Robert Moncada's claim to have birthright citizenship. So does not count. He is not subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Here's the story. Moncada was born in New York City, July 1950, when his father, who was a Nicaraguan national, was working for Nicaragua's permanent mission to the United Nations. For nearly 70 years, Moncada lived and worked in the United States as an American citizen. 5 times he subscribed the oath of allegiance, and 5 times the government issued a passport. In 2018, however, the government revoked his passport. Said, wait a minute, you didn't acquire birthright citizenship because his father, your dad, when he was here, he had diplomatic immunity when Moncada was born. And I'm wondering, like, who caught that, man? And how did this even come up after all those years? It's like wild. So somebody was reviewing those records. And of course, that was during the Trump years, so we don't know what was going on there. But this guy got flagged. Actually, you're not a citizen. Your dad was a diplomat, so no. The 14th Amendment provides, we've read it many times, all persons born in the United States, comma, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, comma, are citizens of the United States. Now, a lot of other judges just forget those commas because they think they don't matter because it serves them to delete them. But it is a separate phrase. And Moncada's claim depends. Is he actually subject to the jurisdiction of the United States when he was born? Or did he have immunity through his dad? Looking to federal and international law, the panel explained that the question turned on whether President Truman received Moncada's father as an attaché, okay, going all the way back. So was he classified as this or that? Or whether he served as a consul, okay, because there's a difference. So how did Truman receive this person in? If Moncada's father was an attaché, then the father and his family, everybody, held full diplomatic immunity, meaning they were not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, because you can't prosecute them. They can, do something bad and you can't, they're immune. So they're not subject to the jurisdiction. They haven't agreed or acquiesced to the jurisdiction. Okay, they still have their old jurisdiction, which the United States is honoring. And if that is true, not subject to the jurisdiction, then he doesn't have citizenship status, not a birthright citizen. Now, if the father was a consul, a different status, then he held immunity, but much more limited, only for official acts, meaning that he and his family were subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, okay, because he could get prosecuted, and Moncada was a birthright citizenship. Again, by their agreement, right? They're coming in. Yes, if he was a consul, I'm a consul. Something happens here. It's a different agreement. The country, the sovereign, the United States entered into these terms with this person, and they came here all by agreement. Now, in the district court, the Secretary of State produced a recently executed certification of Moncada's diplomatic immunity at birth, right? Got some sort of certification, says, you got immunity, little baby. Arguing it was conclusive and binding, meaning this is evidence he does not have citizen, okay? If he's got immunity, he cannot have citizenship. The district court declined to recognize that certificate as conclusive, but it still held that the secretary established by clear and convincing evidence that he was not a citizen. So then the panel explained how this all works. Generally speaking, when the president receives a diplomat, how they do that is conclusive under the Constitution. But whether the president has in fact received a diplomat such that the diplomat's children are not entitled to birthright citizenship goes over to the 14th Amendment, and Congress says the courts answer this question. So why are the courts even getting involved? Because Congress wants them to. Now, the panel agreed with the district court that the certificate was not conclusive evidence of his non-citizenship, saying that while a certificate may be important evidence, we have to consider the factual determination in whether the president received the person as a diplomat. It is not conclusive to the exclusion of other conflicting evidence. And so we look at a bunch of things. Now, the panel reviewed the evidence, including the conflicting evidence, and concluded the district court did not clearly err, not a clear mistake, saying that dad held diplomatic immunity. And so they're very unhappy about this decision. They note the district court said this is impossible to conclude that this is justice, right? Shout out to them. Very unhappy. They say, I cannot believe we're divesting this dude who's been here like 70 years and has all of these oaths of affirmation. We're stripping him of citizenship. They're like, yeah, we have to. It's the law, which is right. It's exactly right. It is the law. Impossible to conclude that this is justice. The panel stated it shared the concern, but explained that as inequitable as this result is, courts lack the power, the equitable power to remedy the government's errors. I mean, it's called judicial restraint. Yes, thank you. Nice to see it for once. You're not supposed to substitute your opinions. If the law is clear, the law is clear. Okay, you might want to fund all of the AIDS doctors in Africa and all the trans programs in Central America, but the laws that enable the president to take care of the execution of the laws support him. Now, here's the full opinion. More background. Robert Moncada, born July 1950, dad, Nicaraguan national, worked for the permanent mission to the United Nations. And I'm wondering if, the Trump administration came in and they're wondering, who do we know from Nicaragua? And maybe they're having a Nicaraguan problem and maybe this guy's still doing work, but let's see. 70 years, lived and worked in the United States as an American citizen. 5 times subscribed to the oath of allegiance. 5 times the government issued him a passport. In the district court's words, a child was born in America, told by the government, his own government, that he was an American citizen, and it told him this again and again and again. The government repeatedly affirmed that Moncada's father and his status did not confer diplomatic immunity on his kids. They were wrong. So the government said that he was born subject to the jurisdiction thereof, and he was a citizen. But the government was wrong all along. In 2018, the government reviewed the records and found that Moncada's father served as an attaché. He was not a consul when Moncada was born, and that means full diplomatic immunity. So the government now says, actually, he was not born subject to the jurisdiction thereof, and he is not a citizen. And the government revoked his passport and told him he did not acquire U.S. citizenship by virtue of his birth here. Again, I'm wondering what triggered that. Like, did this dude start speaking out? Is he like, talking garbage against Trump? So they're like, look into his background. What's he doing here? Moncada sued for a declaratory judgment that he's a citizen. The secretary responded by showing a certification of his diplomatic immunity at birth. And of course, we battled over that. But here's the background on the decision. The government recognized and then denied his birthright citizenship status. And here's more. Ambassadors and other public ministers hold full diplomatic immunity, and federal law in effect when he was born voided a bunch of other things. And with limited exceptions, this diplomatic immunity does extend to the family. Okay, so immunity goes to the family. Consuls have immunity only for their official acts, however. So some details and background there. Now, we do not know exactly when and how the president received Dr. Moncada as an attaché or admitted him as a consul because the paper trail has faded over 70 years. Ambiguities and gaps in the remaining records lead to a dispute over his title and work, which determines the scope of his immunity. Moncada claims that his father served as consul when he was born and cites documents, and Truman also recognized him as consul of Nicaragua. But confusingly, a July 1950 UN document lists Moncada as both consul New York and attaché, and several government records show that Moncada, Dr. the dad, served as an attaché, which means full immunity for everybody. But still, the government repeatedly recognized him, and it concluded one point until 2017 when they said, nope, you're an attaché. say, sorry. So you are not a citizen. So he sued, of course, we're in court now, and he appealed. Now they say in their holding, sorry, not a citizen. He was born in the United States. So the only phrase that we need to consider here is this one, subject to the jurisdiction thereof. What does it mean? When ratified, the clause was understood to exclude non-citizens who belong to the families of foreign governments. This exclusion incorporated long-standing international law, right? Or if you want to do like civilized business with other nations, you don't prosecute each other and you just guarantee that. So when you send your people, we won't take them into custody, and we're not going to take your people into custody, and it would be fair and we can negotiate. Now, the question of immunity, the president has a duty to receive foreign ambassadors and lots of law. Okay, all these are, citing the laws, so on. So here, Congress's citizenship powers under Article 1 and the 14th Amendment, they intersect with the president's diplomatic reception powers, and Article 3 powers also overlap. And so there's a lot of different interests at play here. Now, to review, Moncada's claim to birthright citizenship depends on whether he was born subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And of course, that depends on the status of his daddy. Now, we hold that the certificate is not conclusive here, so we may look beyond it to other evidence to see if the lower level court made a clear error. And they say they didn't. The president's exclusive power to receive these people is in the Constitution. Lots more case law here. Second case, application of this case, Supreme Court precedent. And they say, okay, so now, while a certificate may be important evidence for courts to consider, it's not enough alone. It's just their view of the facts. And here, as explained below, there is conflicting evidence on the record. And so we need to review the findings from the lower level court finally. A person claiming United States citizenship bears the burden of producing substantial credible evidence to support that. Now, this burden matches the gravity of the task, saying evidence of a passport is substantial evidence of your citizenship, but there was conflicting evidence here. And Moncada presented evidence to the contrary, saying my dad was actually not somebody who had total immunity. And so in conclusion, in the absence of a controlling provision of the Constitution, we must give full effect to our country's guarantee of birthright citizenship to those who were subject to its jurisdiction. He was not. The Constitution confers on the president alone the legal duty to receive diplomats, and the president can immunize those diplomats from the jurisdiction of the United States. They are not subject officially. But 2 centuries of cases teach that whether a president has, in fact, received and immunized a person is a question of judicial inquiry. This is so even so when the secretary certifies one view, the courts can still get involved. And it's especially so when this merges into birthright citizenship issues, which we have jurisdiction over. Now, the district court, they write, did not clearly err in finding clear and convincing evidence that proved that Moncada was born with immunity. And so therefore, he did not acquire birthright citizenship. The district court also observed that it's impossible to conclude that this is justice. And they say we share our concerns about this. Like, this dude is getting stripped of his citizenship. The government, for its part, concedes that its decades of mistakes led to a very unfortunate and regrettable situation. But as inequitable as this result is, courts lack the equitable power to remedy the government's errors by granting this guy citizenship. And so formality is a virtue of birthright citizenship. It requires no inquiry into lineage, but is restricted only by place and jurisdiction. Yet when circumstances leave a person immune from the jurisdiction of the United States at birth, this same formality requires a court to give full effect to that restriction. Thus, we affirm the judgment of the district court, and that guy does not have birthright citizenship affirmed, because that is the Constitution. You might not like it. If you don't like the subject to the jurisdiction requirement, okay, you can amend the Constitution. Good luck on that. But it says subject to the jurisdiction thereof as an independent clause because that's what it means. Now, this is different than the situation involving an illegal alien who illegally comes into the country and then drops a baby down and calls that kid an American citizen, even though they're in violation of the law. Are they subject to the jurisdiction? Do they come and acquiesce and enter into an agreement? Do they become like a consul versus an attaché? Do they have some lawful permission to be here, to subject themselves to our jurisdiction and agree to abide by it and let us know you're even here in the building? No, they don't. And instead, they just want to say that it's just a geography. As long as you're physically in the borders of the United States and you plop a baby here, even if you're a terrorist, even if you broke into our country, even if you're the worst, flying your Guatemalan, Mexican flags all over the place, you still, as an invader to our country, now can have citizenship? Give me a break, okay? It's ridiculous. It's never how it was supposed to be interpreted, and it has been interpreted that way by a lot of people who are perverting it. But now we're seeing this issue work its way up to the Supreme Court, and this is a step in the right direction, right? Formality is a virtue of birthright citizenship. That's right, and you got to be subject to the jurisdiction thereof. You can't be an illegal invader and then say, well, just because you can arrest me for breaking your laws, that that is subject to the jurisdiction? Answer is that is wrong. Hopefully we'll find the Supreme Court says the same, but a nice decision over from the Ninth Circuit coming down. Big win for It's Rubio. And I'd be curious to know more about what this guy did to anger somebody and get this back on the radar. But of course, more will be revealed on that, no doubt. We'll see what the Supreme Court says. But Ted Cruz is also saying, so non-citizens must go. And Ted Cruz went down to El Salvador with Nayib Bukele to talk about what's going on down there.
In your meeting with Mr. Bukele, are you going to ask him to receive migrants that are now detained in the U.S., migrants from different nationalities, as it happened before with the Venezuelans?
Well, I will say President Trump and President Bukele have a very good relationship, and they have been negotiating the terms of deportations from the United States to El Salvador. President Bukele has been an important partner in responding to what has been a crisis in the United States for the last 4 years. Unfortunately, the previous president of the United States, Joe Biden, under his administration, we had effectively an open border for 4 years. We saw over 12 million illegal immigrants come into the United States. We saw murderers and rapists and gang members released into America, and we saw countless Americans murdered and the victims of violent crime because of those open borders.
Yeah, and Van Hollen went down there.
In the United States, the rate of illegal border crossings dropped 99% when President Trump was sworn back into office. That is the difference between having a leader who will enforce the law and protect your citizens and having a leader who is complicit with open borders. President Bukele has demonstrated similar leadership here in El Salvador. In both instances, you have a leader elected by the people who is not going to surrender to the cartels and the criminals, but rather is going to protect the people. And I think the consequence of that, securing the border in the United States, treating the gang members and the cartels as terrorists, and doing whatever is necessary to keep our citizens safe, I think that's the right approach.
Yes, and we have to enforce our laws. What good is having a bunch of laws on the books if they're just kind of recommendations? If actually the illegal alien population is now going to be the new civil rights movement, which is what it's turning into, okay? How dare you be so cruel? They deserve more constitutional rights and all of this stuff. It's going to be the new movement, so we're watching it right now because they want the foreign invasion to occur because they're sick of people in America who are demanding American values, saying we should expect more from our government. They'd rather just bring in everybody else from all over the world who doesn't understand the sanctity of the Constitution or the foundation of our country so they can water the whole place down and rebuild it in their image. They're doing it in California, Chicago, New York, and we're not going to let them happen here. So we're going to keep our eye on this. Birthright citizenship is a major component of, I think, the trifecta. You got to close the border, you got to handle apportionment, and you got to handle birthright citizenship. And then we'll have a good handle on our immigration system and we can restore America to excellence.